and future directions, past and future directions for all of community organizing. We used to, when I first took a group of, we have a thing called Organizers Forum, and I first took a group of organizers to India, and we'd never been to India, and we had about 15, 20 organizers in India, and we got these meetings with all of the trade federations, and there's one that's very left-linked called C2, the Congress of Indian Trade Unions, C2. Hammer and sickle, totally communist. This is India, so it's a very robust political life. And we're the president of C2, and it only had 5 or 6 million people, so it was not a nothing federation. At one point, we were asking our questions. They're telling us about C2, and then I was sort of the head of the delegation, and he turns to me and they say, "Well, here's what we'd like to know. We want to know what the American working class thinks about," and I forget the question, but it just sort of takes your breath away. I'd never been asked to speak for the entire American working class. So when asked, I said I didn't know if I should, immediately get a line to President John Sweeney, or what do you do when you're asked to speak for the whole American? That's a little bit like this topic, the whole past and future of community organizing, but.
You're ready.
Here's
a
future question.
Yeah,
so,
go.
The weather's changing, and climate change and all that, and maybe New Orleans
Hey,
is part of that.
and
traveling around.
Winter is coming.
Yeah.
I heard it on HBO. Winter is coming. We have to be ready.
And so this raises, or maybe it doesn't raise new questions for community organizing in terms of issues or tactics or what people in places like New Orleans could learn from people in places like India. I don't know. So I'm curious, as you've been traveling around, how that comes up or doesn't come up in terms of things that community organizers have to think about, changes to make, things to do.
Well, obviously, I do believe we learn tremendous amounts from the organizing methodology in other countries. Mm-hmm. That doesn't make me part of a large group of people. But you can't go to Brazil or India or Indonesia or wherever and not see different things that are moving huge numbers of people. We loaned an organizer to one of our partners in Jakarta a couple of years ago because they wanted help in trying to take a next step and get more involved politically. And because, we knew so much from our experience in the United States, and we were loaning a dedicated professional political organizer. They were convinced that they wanted this rally to have 10,000 people. Well, we looked at the work, and she'd been over there about 6 weeks of a 2-month promise, and she thought, God, I don't think there's any way they could do more than 1,000 people. We've done this work, we've hit these doors, we've put out these flyers and whatever. There's no way this is 10,000, so what should I tell Warda, was a woman's name who heads the organization. She didn't have any good advice, so I started trying to warn the lady, well, it's not going to be 10,000, we think we're doing everything we can do, we've got all your people. And of course, there were 7,000 people there. How many times do any of us get to put 7,000 people into a meeting? But it's a different scale, there's a different understanding of what moves mass numbers, and, we could start and end every conversation I ever have about community organizing about whether or not we have a methodology to get to scale. ACORN was very big and never solved the problem we were always trying to solve the problem of how to get the scale we needed to make the kind of change that we wanted to see made, and we weren't there. And Randy can speak to that. And we were way ahead in terms of scale of many others in our work. And you had to be self-critical. When I left, we were on the pace to spend $100 million that year through all the family of organizations. But, I spent years organizing against Walmart, and that's really only the size of about 2 or 3 good-sized supercenters in terms of what money they move through. So you have to, you can't get the big head in this work. If we're really trying to make the kind of change we're talking about. Clearly, the Occupy stuff was interesting, even though tactically unfortunate. You take hope from these kinds of things, even if the tactic devours the strategy. And, it's been interesting to see around elsewhere outside of North America how people respond to the sense of Occupy, which is in some ways a derivation of so much of the Occupy process. And for most community organizers, it's a kill me now process. I mean, this whole notion of going forever and making hand signs or whatever, that's not a community organizer thing. But I actually think that's probably one of its most interesting contributions. It's a real effort to try to get maximum participation of the sort of membership there. And yes, it's painful and takes a lot of time, but it's a consensus that you can try to hold to as opposed to one that is more forced. So I actually think a residual impact of the Occupy movement is going to be that crazy-ass process, no matter what professional organizers might think about it. And if you look into, yeah, that's right. I'm always very careful because there's only one sign I'm sure of, and I'm pretty sure if I did any others, I could get into real trouble somehow. It'd be like, is this really hook 'em horns? Not necessarily. So, and when you look at the roots of all of it in Spain and elsewhere, very dramatic what they're doing over there with this kind of tactic. So our Occupy was such a sort of a limp example of what you saw emerging in, real social movements in Spain and other countries that, it was fascinating to me. The biggest lessons I've had to have been forced to learn was watching ACORN go under. I mean, when I left, and obviously arrogantly, I thought we were in pretty good shape. Had 100 offices, had almost 500,000 members. This was the level, I've already said at the level we were spending at. We'd done 50,000 tax returns the year before. We were doing, housing counseling for almost 80,000 families. We were moving big numbers. We were on course to try to register more than 1 million people in that cycle, maybe 1.5 million. So I thought that we had it right. There was about a third of the money that came from membership and internal sources, a third that came from contracts and other, sort of fee-for-service kinds of benefits, and a third that came from outside sources, grants, foundations, government contracts, or whatever. And then I watched the new management and leadership, for whatever reason, it must have been terrible, have to pull the plug on the organization November 5th of 2010, right, election day of that year. And if you'd asked me the day I left, June 2nd of 2008, whether that was even possible remotely, I would have been willing to argue with you forever that the base and the permanence of the organization was pretty secured. So clearly, in the 38 years I ran ACORN, I made a bushel basket full of huge errors, but somehow it's just, mean and ornery enough to survive or whatever. And certainly the people that replaced me were more than mean and ornery enough, I would have thought. But when they caught this perfect storm, particularly as the newer strategy in the Republican right became, and we've now seen it repeated over and over again, NPR, Planned Parenthood, NEA, they've tried it over and over again. But they were very good the first time out on ACORN, and ACORN, the video was misedited and whatever, but there's no question people broke the do right rule. I don't have a strong enough character to ever watched any of it, but I've read all about it, so I know enough about what was there to know I didn't want to have to look at it. And when Fox News interviewed me, I wanted to be able to say, I looked at this video. I was in Canada. They don't really have TV up there yet. And since nobody knows about Canada, it's a pretty safe secret. Anytime I do a blog, I can guarantee you on Google Analytics, if y'all all know what Google Analytics are, but you can tell how many people read your blog every day. Every time I do a blog on Canada, it's like it's a commitment to Canada that I do it because half the people say, "Oh, Canada, kill me now." And if I did something maybe on Canada beer and hockey, maybe I wouldn't go back down so hard. But